Jotaro Kujo might be one of the easiest anime characters to misunderstand because if you only look at him from the surface, the guy almost looks hilariously simple. He barely talks, he's permanently irritated, he insults people constantly, he keeps his hands in his pockets like moving them would personally offend him, and whenever somebody starts explaining some ridiculously complicated stand ability, Jotaro usually looks at them like he's already decided they're getting punched in the face. That's the Jotaro most people remember. The walking one-liner machine who somehow looks bored even when a vampire is trying to murder him. But underneath all of that, Jotaro is actually one of the most emotionally restrained and surprisingly tragic characters in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. His entire personality revolves around the guy who cares way more than he knows how to communicate. And the older he gets, the more you realize that the famous Jotaro coolness wasn't always confidence. Sometimes it was protection. Sometimes it was fear. And eventually, that emotional distance became one of his biggest weaknesses. The funniest thing about Jotaro is that his actions almost never match the way he talks. He acts like Holly annoys him, but the moment her life is threatened, he travels across the world to save her. He complains about Joseph constantly, but he'd throw himself directly into danger to protect him. That's basically his entire emotional language. Jotaro doesn't tell people he loves them, he protects them. He doesn't tell people he's worried, but he puts himself between them and whatever is trying to kill them. He doesn't sit down and explain how important someone is to him because apparently that would kill him faster than Dio ever could. Instead, Jotaro communicates almost entirely through action, and honestly that makes Holly incredibly important to understanding him. Holly is basically Jotaro's complete opposite. She's openly affectionate, warm, expressive, and gentle. She tells him exactly how she feels. Jotaro clearly loves her, but instead of responding with the same energy, he pushes back against it. Part of that is just teenage rebellion because Jotaro is only 17 during Stardust Crusaders, and people sometimes forget that because he looks like a 34-year-old professional wrestler. He's still a teenager trying to establish his own identity, so he overcorrects. He doesn't just become independent, he tries to become emotionally untouchable. Jotaro's entire image is basically something he's built around himself. Araki took heavy inspiration from old school strong silence heroes, especially that Clint Eastwood type of character. The guy who barely speaks, never panics, and looks like he's already figured everything out before anybody else has even realized there's a problem. That's Jotaro. But JoJo does something really interesting with that archetype because it doesn't leave him frozen in time. We actually get to see what happens when that teenager grows older while continuing to live that way. The silence that looked cool in part 3 starts becoming a lot more complicated. Start Platinum makes this even more interesting because stands are essentially expressions of their user's spirit, and Jotaro somehow gets the loudest stand imaginable. Jotaro himself is controlled, quiet, still. Start Platinum comes out screaming, it throws hundreds of punches, smashes through walls, catches bullets, crushes insanely durable objects, and reacts violently the moment Jotaro is threatened. It's basically everything Jotaro keeps bottled up, except given giant purple muscles. Jotaro suppresses everything. Start Platinum expresses everything physically. And Start Platinum is also a perfect reflection of the way Jotaro fights. On paper, it's actually pretty straightforward. Super strength, super speed, incredible reflexes, extreme precision, excellent eyesight, close range dominance. That's basically the package. But Jotaro turns something simple into something terrifying because he's incredibly intelligent with how he uses it. Everybody remembers the punches because obviously the Aura Barrage is iconic, but Start Platinum's precision might honestly be its most dangerous ability. This thing can catch a bullet fired at point blank range. It can perform extremely delicate movements. It can detect tiny details from far away. It can manipulate objects with ridiculous accuracy. At one point, Start Platinum literally sketches a detailed image of a stand user from observation. That's insane. Jotaro basically has microscopic precision attached to something strong enough to beat supernatural monsters into the pavement. And that's why I actually think Jotaro could have used Start Platinum in even crazier ways than we saw. For example, he could have leaned way harder into precision targeting. Start Platinum doesn't need to destroy somebody's entire body. It could disable joints, nerves, weapons, or pressure points almost instantly. A perfectly placed strike would end most fights before Jotaro even needs the full Ora Ora treatment. He could also use small projectiles way more often: coins, ball bearings, pieces of metal, even broken debris. Start Platinum's strength and precision could turn tiny objects into dangerous high-speed projectiles. Imagine Jotaro walking around with a pocket full of steel balls and flicking them across a battlefield. Suddenly, that short-range weakness becomes a lot less comfortable for everybody else. He could also use Start Platinum for movement more creatively: push against walls, grab structures while falling, launch himself using the environment, redirect his momentum, or even use debris as temporary platforms. JoJo eventually gets much more creative with stand-assisted movement, but Jotaro usually just walks directly toward danger. And honestly, the medical potential of Start Platinum might be even crazier. We literally see Jotaro use it to restart Joseph's heart after the battle with Dio. That's insane control. With that kind of precision, Start Platinum could theoretically remove foreign objects from wounds, stabilize injuries, and perform emergency procedures that normal human hands simply couldn't. Jotaro had one of the strongest combat stands in the series and technically could have also worked as an emergency surgeon. Imagine getting beaten half to death by Start Platinum and then have the same stand stitch you back together afterward. Then there's Time Stop, and I love how perfectly that ability fits Jotaro psychologically. Think about what Jotaro has been doing emotionally throughout his entire life: controlling, suppressing, stopping himself from reacting. Dio is completely different. Dio is theatrical, dramatic, narcissistic. He wants everybody looking at him. He wants worship. He wants the entire world to revolve around him. Jotaro wants almost the exact opposite. He wants control, he wants silence, and then his ultimate ability literally becomes making the entire world stop moving. The fight against Dio works even better when you realize how similar they are on the surface. Both are intimidating, both are absurdly confident, both have overwhelming close-range stands, both can stop time, both tend to look at weaker opponents like they're barely worth acknowledging. But psychologically, they're completely different. Dio's confidence comes from ego. Jotaro's confidence comes from discipline. Dio constantly needs people beneath him. He needs other people to reinforce the idea that he's superior. Jotaro couldn't care less whether anybody thinks he's impressive. Half the time, he looks annoyed that people are even talking to him. That's why their final confrontation isn't just Start Platinum versus the world. It's restraint versus indulgence. Dio believes power elevates him beyond humanity. Jotaro's power is constantly used because he cares about other humans, especially his family. That's the whole reason Stardust Crusaders happens. Jotaro doesn't travel to Egypt because he wants adventure. He isn't trying to prove he's the greatest stand user alive. He doesn't care about becoming some legendary hero. His mom is dying, that's it. Jotaro crosses continents and fights supernatural assassins because he loves Holly. He just never says it. That also explains why one of Jotaro's most impressive fights doesn't even involve him punching somebody for most of it. The Darby poker match is basically a perfect Jotaro character study. He realizes very quickly that the battle isn't really about cards. It's about confidence. Darby is afraid of Dio, so Jotaro weaponizes his reputation and his unreadable personality. He keeps raising the stakes while barely reacting. He doesn't even need to know whether his cards are good because he's not trying to beat Darby at poker. He's trying to convince Darby that Jotarokujo would never make a move unless he's already won. That's terrifying. And that's why Jotaro's intelligence gets underrated. He's not Joseph, loudly improvising plans and explaining how clever he is. Jotaro's intelligence is quieter. He's a combat problem solver. JoJo fights are basically supernatural riddles where the wrong answer gets you murdered, and Jotaro is ridiculously good at solving them under pressure. He observes patterns, tests possibilities, bluffs when necessary, and waits for the exact moment an opponent exposes something. Then he hits them with enough force to make them reconsider every single decision they've made since birth. His design reinforces all of this too. Jotaro has one of the most recognizable silhouettes in anime. The coat, the chain, the massive shoulders, the hat blending into his hair, everything screams intimidation. Technically, his part 3 outfit is a school uniform, which is hilarious because no normal person looks at Jotaro and thinks thinks, yeah, that guy definitely has algebra after lunch. The uniform has been modified so heavily that it almost becomes armor. The giant coat makes his body look even larger. The chain adds this delinquent edge. The hat shadows his face and makes his eyes harder to read, which helps create that Western gunslinger vibe Araki wanted. Even the way his design changes tells a story. Part 3 Jotaro is darker, rougher, and more rebellious. By part 4, he's wearing lighter colors and looks cleaner and more professional. He's grown up. He becomes a marine biologist, which will never stop being funny considering one of the most intimidating men in anime apparently decided dolphins were his true calling. But it actually fits him perfectly. Marine biology requires observation, patience, and long stretches of quiet research. Jotaro basically found the one career where he can stare silently at animals and nobody expects him to make small talk. That's probably paradise for him. But the part of Jotaro's story that changes everything is Jolene. Stardust Crusaders makes his emotional distance look cool. Stone Ocean shows you the cost of living that way for decades. Jotaro grows up, gets married, and has a daughter, but his life never really escapes Dio's shadow. Dio's influence keeps spreading long after he's gone, so Jotaro approaches fatherhood the same way he approaches everything else, logically. If dangerous people are targeting him, then keeping his daughter away from him should keep her safe. On paper, that makes sense. Emotionally, it's a disaster, because Jolene doesn't know what's happening inside Jotaro's head. She doesn't see the enemies he's trying to protect her from. She doesn't understand that his distance is coming from fear. All she knows is that her father isn't there. That's what makes their relationship so painful. Jotaro loves through actions, but what happens when the person you love can't see those actions? Then love becomes invisible. Jotaro thinks he's protecting Jolene. Jolene thinks he abandoned her. And when Jotaro finally comes back into her life, you immediately see how important she is to him. He risks everything to protect her. He puts himself in danger without hesitation. Eventually, during the battle against Pucci, Jotaro gets put into the worst possible situation for somebody like him. He has to make a choice between stopping Pucci and saving Jolene. Strategically stopping Pucci is the correct move. Jotaro knows that, but when Jolene is threatened, he can't ignore her. He chooses his daughter, and that decision gets exploited. That moment completely destroys the idea that Jotaro is emotionless because the man famous for absolute composure loses because of love. Teenage Jotaro survives by controlling his emotions. Adult Jotaro is defeated because there is one emotion he can't suppress when it matters most. He loves his daughter. And I don't even see that as Jotaro becoming weaker. It's actually the completion of his character. The 17-year-old who acted like he didn't care about anybody eventually proves that caring was always the reason he did everything. When you look at his life, his emotional distance also starts making a lot more sense. Jotaro spends most of his youth watching what happens when people get involved with stand-related conflicts. People disappear, people die. So Jotaro's response is control. Gather information, stay calm, keep loved ones away from danger, handle everything yourself. That strategy works amazingly well in combat. It works terribly in relationships. You can protect somebody from an enemy by staying away from them. However, you cannot protect your relationship with them using the same strategy. That's probably Jotaro's biggest flaw. He's incredible at understanding enemies, but terrible at explaining himself to people he loves. Give Jotaro 10 seconds with an enemy stand and he'll figure out 3 weaknesses. Ask him how to explain his feelings to his daughter and suddenly the world's greatest tactical genius has nothing. And philosophically, that's what makes him so interesting. Jotaro represents action over words. He rarely gives giant speeches about morality. He simply acts when somebody needs help. There's almost a stoic philosophy built into him. Focus on what you can control. Don't waste energy. Don't reveal unnecessary information. Endure discomfort. Act when action becomes necessary. But JoJo also quietly shows the downside of that mindset. Emotional control can become emotional avoidance. Strength can become loneliness. That's why I think Jotaro gets much better when you judge his story across multiple parts instead of only looking at Stardust Crusaders. Part 3 gives you the idealized strong silence hero. Part 4 shows that hero growing into a mentor. Part 6 is asking what happens when a person lives like that for too long. The answer is that eventually somebody you love might need more than protection. They might need you to actually be there. And if we're talking what if scenarios, a fully optimized Jotaro is honestly terrifying. Imagine if he trained using time stop obsessively the same way Dio experimented with it. Even a few extra seconds would completely change most fights. Start Platinum's biggest weakness is range, but time stop basically cheats around that weakness because Jotaro can reposition while the enemy literally cannot react. Give him enough frozen time and most stand users don't even get a second move. He could stop time, cross the distance, destroy their weapon, disable them, and return to his original position before they even understand what happened. Now imagine adding smarter projectile usage on top of that. Jotaro stops time, throws or positions several objects around an enemy, resumes time, and suddenly they're getting attacked from multiple directions. Basically a more tactical version of Dio's knives without all the dramatic posing. What if Jotaro had actually trained Jolene? Imagine Jolene growing up knowing about stands. She understands Dio's history, she understands how stand battles work, she knows how to analyze abilities, and most importantly, she learns directly from Jotaro. Stone Free is already ridiculously versatile. Add Jotaro's combat mindset to Jolene from childhood and Pushi suddenly has a serious problem. But that's the irony. Jotaro probably never trained her because he wanted her far away from that life. The exact knowledge that would have protected her was the thing he refused to expose her to. There are also a lot of smaller things about Jotaro people overlook. He's way funnier than he gets credit for. His humor is just incredibly dry. He gets placed into some of the most ridiculous situations imaginable and barely reacts, which honestly makes them even funnier. Jotaro isn't somebody who cracks jokes every 30 seconds. He's the guy standing in the corner looking completely serious while everyone else is losing their minds. And somehow that's the joke. He also becomes noticeably more patient with younger stand users as he gets older. Look at how he treats Koichi. Jotaro respects him because Koichi repeatedly demonstrates courage. That's important because Jotaro values courage more than raw strength. He's surrounded by powerful people throughout the series, but the characters he seems to respect most are the ones who keep moving even when they're scared. That tells you something about him too. Jotaro isn't fearless. He just refuses to let fear control what he does. And I think that's ultimately why Jotaro becomes the face of JoJo for so many people. Jonathan started the bloodline, Joseph brought the chaos, but Jotaro became the icon because he represents something central to JoJo's entire battle philosophy, staying composed while everything around you becomes completely insane. JoJo constantly throws impossible situations at its characters: killer animals, invisible enemies, time manipulation, sentient stands, murderous babies. Whatever bizarre nightmare Araki came up with that week, and Jotaro's response is usually the same: observe, understand, adapt, then punch accordingly. That's why calling Jotaro boring has always felt weird to me. He's not boring, he's restrained. Joseph tells you what he's thinking. Jotaro makes you pay attention to what he's doing, and that's why he gets better the more you revisit him. Jotaro Kujo spent his life pretending emotions couldn't control him, but when everything finally came down to one impossible decision, he chose his daughter. And I think that's what makes him so good. For somebody who could literally stop time, Jotaro was never very good at spending it with the people he loved. And somehow, that makes one of the coolest characters in anime one of the most human too. Thanks for watching the video. If you have any anime characters or anime topics you'd like me to analyze, drop them down in the comments below. You already know. JV out!